What's up, dudes and dudettes? Welcome back to another Q&A. Let's jump right into it. So first question number 24. Is doing OHP variations alone enough for side delt growth? And are wide grip rows alone enough for rear delt growth? Or is this a suboptimal thing? So I have to do a whole video on the word suboptimal. Don't worry too much if something is optimal or suboptimal. You're never going to know what is optimal. You're never going to know if there's something better that you should be doing. Strive for progress and progression. That's basically the best you can hope for. Now, in terms of side delt growth, OHP is good. It certainly will target your side delt, and you can develop the side delts from OHP variations. But I would say to maximize your side delt development, it seems like a lot of people do add in isolation work, and so that is probably a good idea. For rear delt growth, I would say wide grip rows. Again, it depends on how much you want to push your physique and how much time and energy and effort are you willing to invest. Lots of people get very, very impressive rear delts from just rows, and so I would say for most people that is probably enough. But you can try incorporating isolation work and seeing if it has an impact. The only way to tell is to go into the gym, try something, be observant, and see if it works. Like, there's no way for me to see or know if it's actually going to be optimal for you. Next question, what's your approach to coming back to a lift you got injured on? I haven't gotten seriously hurt on deadlifts, but I overdid it, going to failure with suboptimal form, and had back issues. I took 5 weeks off, but I really want to deadlift again. Would you recommend relearning the movement with higher reps? Not necessarily higher reps, but you're going to want to keep reps in reserve. I am known for training to failure. I don't train to failure on deadlifts or Romanian deadlifts or squats just because I think those are already very, very stimulatory movements. They are already, working the lengthened positions anyway, and just in terms of risk reward, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So it doesn't necessarily need to be higher reps, but you do need to find out why you got hurt and not do that in the future. Your body can adapt over time, but if something got you hurt once, it could happen again, and so I would check your technique. You could film yourself. You might want to hire a powerlifting coach or some other coach who can, walk you through the correct technique. Make sure you're bracing, make sure you're locked in, and don't put the lift on a pedestal. That's another thing. Just because something did get you hurt once, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the movement. It could be a combination of the movement and then just doing too much too soon or just not being ready for doing that lift. All right, next one. How do you handle working out while sick? Do you just take time off to recover or work out, reducing intensity and volume based on how you feel? So if you are contagious, I would say probably best just to stay home and not infect other people with whatever you have. Probably a good idea, just to be considerate to other people. If you have something that probably is not contagious, then yeah, I would go based on how you feel. I might take time off if it's like a chest cold or something that would really impact performance. I don't get sick very often. I've been sick once, maybe twice in the past 2 or 3 years. So it's not an issue that I have to deal with very often. If you're getting sick a lot, it's probably a sign that you need to work on your lifestyle or your stress or your diet or something else like that. You should probably not be getting sick very, very often in most cases. Now, if you're a teacher or if you have to interact with a lot of people, sure, it might to a certain extent be unavoidable. But I would say if you're getting sick a lot, yeah, it's something that you should try to work on. Like, it's not normal to be constantly sick, and so if this is impacting your life and your training a lot, it's probably a sign that something is wrong. See a doctor, get some blood work or whatever. And I tend to go by feel. If you have to reduce the volume or the intensity, that's fine. I tend to reduce the volume first, and then maybe the intensity slightly after that if needed. And you could always do some light cardio, just staying active, walking is good, etc. You don't have to go balls to the walls. All right, next question, a bulking and cutting one. The consensus among the community seems to be that if you are higher than 20% body fat, you don't need to bulk, as fat stores can be used for energy. I think that's a good rule of thumb. Would you ever advise that someone at a higher body fat range, 25 to 30%, bulk? Some bigger people cutting down might plateau and still be in the 20 to 30% range. Should they maintain for a bit and continue cutting, or bulk to gain some lean mass to make future cuts potentially easier? I feel like I'm in this place right now, so your thoughts would be appreciated. Loving your content. Thank you. So I would say gaining lean body mass to increase your metabolism is not a great strategy. Muscle does not burn as many calories as you think it burns. It really doesn't. It's not like 50 calories per pound or something. I think it's more like 6 or 7 calories. Essentially, almost nothing, right? Even if you're very active and you have to carry that muscle backpack around, it's not burning as many calories as most people think it does. And if you are 25 to 30% body fat, that is still at a range that it will likely be impacting your long-term health. So I would say bulking is off the table. And if you cannot recomp at 25 to 30% body fat, it means your training really has some major issues, because that should be doable. Even if you cut down from much higher, it should still be possible. And I would absolutely not bulk. The only circumstances would be if someone is a serious athlete and they're willing to potentially perhaps sacrifice their health a little bit in order, if they're a football lineman or a strongman or a power lifter, that kind of thing, and they are really, really performance driven, and that weight can actually help them in their life. But for most people, absolutely not worth it. I do not work with people who are 30% body fat and they're like, man, I need to bulk. I tell them no, and if they insist on it, I don't work with them, point blank. All right, next question, another sort of bulking and cutting one a little bit. Theoretically, you are 3 to 5 years into lifting, but never bulked, and just decided to officially start your first mass phase. Will your rate of growth be similar to someone who is a total beginner or not anymore? Probably not, because if you've been lifting for 3 to 5 years, but you never bulked, presumably you gained some amount of muscle, right? I mean, even if you're at roughly maintenance, or you did, like a recomp or something in the beginning, you must have done something, right? There must have been some progress, some amount of muscle growth, and so you are not a beginner anymore, right? You're not as sensitive to training, you are closer to your theoretical potential or whatever, and so no, you won't gain nearly as much, and you should probably not be as aggressive with your bulk as a beginner might. All right, next question. Can you make gains getting 6 to 7 hours of sleep? I know 7 to 9 is ideal, but sometimes life and or insomnia really get in the way. I would say the vast majority of people can make gains on 6 to 7 hours of sleep. It's not optimal. It's not ideal. You'll probably see better results from 7 to 9, but you can almost certainly still make progress on that as long as your training is good. Maybe you won't be able to handle quite as much volume, but I mean, unless you're very, very, very advanced, you should probably still be able to make progress. All right, next question. Do you think training at roughly the same time each day is important, i.e. always training at 1 p.m. versus training at 1 p.m. on 4 days and then the other 2 days at 6 p.m.? I am a creature of habit, as a lot of bodybuilders are, and so I like to train at the same time every day as much as possible, usually like 2 to 2:30 when I start. But I don't think this makes a huge difference. You can adapt the training at any time, and I would say this is mostly either mental or perhaps your state of caffeination. If you work out in the morning and you're caffeinated, and then later you work out in the evening and you're not caffeinated, that might cause something. Or even bigger, if you work out in the evening and you feel good in the evening, and then you have to do a morning workout, that can really impact your performance. So most people will feel better a little bit later. It's rare to have someone feel better in the morning. Those people do exist, but they are less common than people who perform better in the evening. Evening is just when you have more meals in you, you're more alert. I mean, they've done studies on your chronotype, essentially, where the majority of people perform better in the evening. That's when most world records are set for track and field. That's why most track and field meets are not held early in the morning, because you just wouldn't see that great of performances. Next question 17. Dude, how the hell do calisthenics guys, like for example, Andrea LaRosa, have such big shoulders and arms with no lateral raises or direct arm work? I personally never connected with any form of lateral raise and was wondering if I could get some cannonballs just by pressing alone, because I believe that's what they mostly do, right? So probably is arm dominant like me. Personally, I actually found that I had to do isolation work to maximize things, but there are some real freaks out there who just pressing, pushing, pulling, rowing, calisthenics, they will get some freaky arms. So yeah, for some people it can work. For you, it might work, but for most people, probably not going to maximize your development. You can get decent delts, decent arms from that, but for most people, yeah, you want isolation. Another question very similar. Do you believe changing all push, press, and pull upper body compounds to closer grips is a worthwhile change if one wants to specialize in building arm mass when very torso dominant? For example, close grip bench press, narrow grip pull downs, etc. You will get more arm development from narrower grips. For me, I find that due to my shoulder imbalances, I am basically just as strong with the close grip. It feels a lot more stable when I'm bench pressing. Same with pull-ups. Neutral grip with a narrow, I'm much stronger than, wider. And I think that has actually contributed to my arm development. But again, I had to add in isolations to really maximize things. And if you're torso dominant, you're going to be using your torso a lot, even with those narrower grips. It'll be more arms, but you do want to isolate just in order to take the torso completely out of it. All right, next question. Can you get big forearms from just pulling movements, because most of us don't have time to isolate forearms? You can develop this area quite a bit from just holding on to rows, holding on to pull-ups, etc. And I would say you can get pretty big, probably not maximizing it. I think you want some kind of dynamic, wrist curl, wrist flexion. But this is the area that is just not worked when you're pulling, right? Because it's not just activated at all. So you want some kind of wrist extension to balance that out. I think it's also probably good for wrist and elbow health as well. So you probably don't need wrist curls, although they might help. And if you want big forearms, I would say wrist extensions are going to be necessary. Our next question, kind of a tricky one. Oi mate, I'm struggling to do barbell squats. Once I finish my set, my blood pressure proceeds to drop dramatically, giving me the feeling of nearly passing out and impacting performance on later sets. Would practicing the Valsalva maneuver help me become more used to it, or is there a better way to prepare myself? I would practice bracing because it's different. You can feel the tension up here or in your abdominals. So you can do Pallof presses. You can do, what I do is a front plate iso hold. So you hold a plate, 5 kilos, 10 kilos, 15 kilos, maybe a little bit heavier if you're very strong, but start light. And you practice that feeling of bracing. And it's different from holding your breath and feeling it like in your head and in your neck. That might be what you're feeling. You want to be able to contract your abs. And if you can still talk while you're doing it, that's the feeling that you want to go for. Like right now, I'm still doing it. I'm doing it right now. I'm still talking. So you want to be able to get to that point. And I think a lot of people have weak abdominals, the transverse abdominis. And so they kind of compensate for that weakness by just developing pressure everywhere, which might cause lower blood pressure after, I'm not sure. So I would say work on bracing without, getting super, super red in the face. It might happen at some point. It's probably better to do that than, potentially suffer a lower back injury or something. And if you feel like passing out, make sure you have safety supports. That's a big one. And then, you can always sit down after the set, I guess. All right, next question. How can 40 years and older lifters with only access to co-op/condo equipment, which consist of only free weights and a universal cable machine, avoid constant ligament injuries? A bunch of people in my complex complained about this. It's like a hospital gym. So I figured I'd ask. And yes, I did get 2 of your fantastic books. Oh, thank you for the support. And I will link them in a pinned comment down below for anyone else who is interested in those and wants to help support the channel. I really do appreciate it. I would say, what exactly are the injuries? If it's an elbow, this is often actually an upper back issue. If you have an upper back stability issue, sometimes you can get weird forces going through the elbows. If it is a shoulder, again, that could be upper back. So it could be overuse, you're just doing too much. It could be not varying your exercises enough. With free weights and a cable machine, you should be able to have enough variation to not be always doing the exact same thing. A lot of this is also load management and progression. And so it's a little bit hard to say. Could be too much too soon. could be technique, a lot of things that go into this. I would say stay active as well. If you have achy elbows, adding in super high reps on other days. If you have a lower body day, just doing a whole bunch of cable curls, a whole bunch of extensions, etc., that can help a lot just to get blood flow into the area, because often that is the limiting factor for recovery. All right, next question. What is your opinion on interset stretching in between sets, since studies have been showing that it might increase muscle growth? Also, thank you for the amazing content you put out. No problem. Glad you like it. So, I have mixed feelings on this. I think that if it impacts performance excessively, it might not be the best idea. If you look at something like DC training, which has been very popular for a long time, for good reason, it's tried and true, I think they put the stretching at the end of the workout, which to me that makes the most sense. So there might be some benefit to growth, there might be some benefit in terms of range of motion over time, but if it impacts performance a lot, it might kind of cancel that out, and I would put it at the end. Also, I think some muscle groups probably benefit more from this. How much can you really stretch out your quads? Like, I guess a little bit. Maybe you can do like a sissy squat and then hold the bottom position or something. But for some areas, it seems to benefit more than others. I don't think it would hurt as long as you progress gradually with it. Definitely don't overdo this. Don't take like your maximum dumbbell bench press and then like try to, reach the floor or something like that. So progress gradually, be reasonable, and be observant. See if it actually seems to produce growth. I know some people have done this and then, they notice, oh, I have stretch marks on my pecs now. Like, that's a pretty good sign that you're growing. By the way, this video is sponsored by Boostcamp. They are the long-term sponsors for the channel. I actually have 2 programs up on the Boostcamp app, Ravage and Rampage. They are both hypertrophy focused, so if you want to check those out, you can log your progress in the app. It has tons of great programs from some of the best minds in the industry. I will leave a link in the description. They are a fantastic resource. I'm honored to be working with them, and so thank you to Boostcamp for sponsoring this video. All right, next question. Is it a good idea to prioritize vertical presses instead of horizontal presses for long-term shoulder health? And do you think this would have more of a positive or negative physique result? I think you probably want both. In terms of shoulder health, I would say rotator cuff and upper back work is going to be more important than either. So doing your rows, doing your face pulls, doing your lateral raises, getting something to have a huge range of motion and to work on the upper back is probably going to be more important. I have heard a lot of people say that pressing does help their shoulders, so I think it's worth including, but that would not be my go-to to fix a shoulder issue. Do I think this would have a positive or negative physique result? This is mostly personal preference, In terms of aesthetics, this is so individual, It would have probably a positive effect on your shoulders, yeah. Wouldn't really help your chest. For me, I would rather have big shoulders and a moderately big chest than the other way around. And so for me, yeah, I would say this is a positive, but that is individual. All right, question 10. Back in the day, early to mid 2010s-ish, there was a belief that you couldn't be a runner and get big at the same time. Now it seems like a growing contingent, looking primarily at Alan Thrall, is talking about building cardio and work capacity from things that sound suspiciously similar to like a track workout. How would you suggest finding the balance between the two so you don't totally sabotage your growth? So there is such a thing as the interference effect. It is a real thing. It's been measured. However, this is often from pretty extreme protocols, and I would say for most people, they are somewhat complementary, and over time, the more you do them, probably the more you get used to running and the more it will be more of a positive than a negative. It also depends on how advanced you are. If you look at most very, very developed bodybuilders who are interested in maximizing their physique, most of them don't run. And I think there is probably a reason for that. It does eat into your recovery capacity quite a bit. Alan Thrall, awesome channel, love his content, I've watched for many years. I don't think he's looking to put on huge amounts of muscle, I think he's sort of leaned down and now he's focused on multiple things, and that's fine. But if someone wanted to get big, they wanted to go from having a small physique, a small body, to having a big physique, a big body, I would probably not include very much running training in their program. You can do other forms of cardio, you absolutely should, but I don't think doing a lot of running is going to be particularly congruent. And the more advanced you get, the more you have to specialize in muscle growth just to keep going down that road. So those roads can be going down the same path for a certain time, but at a certain point they might diverge. That point is going to be different for every single person. I find that I can't do very much running. I can still run a 5:30 mile, even with very, very little running training, but in terms of eating into my recovery capacity, it's very, very noticeable. Very noticeable. I tweaked my right hamstring the other day, and this was after I added running back in, probably not a coincidence. So at a certain point, especially if you're cutting as I am, especially if you're getting pretty lean as I am, you have to really manage your fatigue, and running causes a lot of that.
So, definitely wrong about the Alan Thrall thing. He's actually working with a new coach, Natural Hypertrophy. I'll link the whole video down below. And so he is certainly still trying to make new gains, but he has tapered back his running to, I think, twice a week for a very easy 20 to 30 minutes. So it's true that if you are very advanced, you still can't ride two horses at once. And if you try, usually it doesn't end up well. So he's still running, but not nearly as much as he was before when it was a main focus.
All right, next question. At what point does gaining more muscle naturally become unhealthy? I think most people don't need to worry about that. I think that's very, very unlikely. Now, if you're like 25% body fat and you gain more muscle, that might increase your blood pressure, that might increase your resting heart rate, but the issue is not the muscle. It's the body fat. I would say if someone is a reasonable body fat percentage, there's no point that it's going to become unhealthy for the vast majority of people. Maybe if you're some genetic freak, some myostatin deficient, Belgian blue looking motherfucker, but I mean, for most people, that's not really a concern. And if someone's like, well, I'm not going to gain muscle because it's unhealthy, you can tell that person's an idiot. They don't really know what they're talking about, and they're probably coping because they couldn't have gained that muscle in the first place. All right, next question, another bulking and cutting one. Is lean bulking really viable for someone trying to maximize long-term muscle growth, i.e. for someone dedicated with good training? Are they better off bulking up and cutting down twice a year at a pound a week on the way up, or once a year at half a pound a week? What are the pros and cons? So a pound a week is pretty aggressive. I mean, I've been there for sure. And so I'm not saying it's necessarily completely wrong. That would be hypocritical. I've been at like a kilo a week after a cut on the rebound, which I think is way too aggressive. I think this bulk for me will be on the leaner side for sure. Often people disguise bad training with a bulk, because especially for bench press, if you gain 10 pounds, your bench press is going to go up, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that your programming is working. It just means that you're eating more, your leverages are improving, and so you're getting stronger. It might not even be muscle growth at that point. Generally, the leaner you are, the more aggressive you can be, and the earlier you are in your training career, the more aggressive you can be. So if someone is a completely skinny beginner, I mean, a pound a week, that might be awesome. That might be optimal. That might be, fantastic. Whereas if someone is more advanced and they are, 18% body fat, they might not want to bulk at all. They might want to main gain or recomp or whatever. So I think this is pretty individual. I think you want to focus on the training and not worry too much about the exact numbers. I can tell you, and I see this a lot, it's not just you, people who are like, if I gain this much or this much, just gain a bit and focus on the training and use the bulk to have good training. That always has to be the main focus. And I think it's good that you mentioned that, and that has to be the focus over trying to target a certain amount of weight gain. It won't even be linear. There's going to be fluctuations anyway. What do you think about eating less maintenance on rest days during a bulk? I think that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And spacing your calories more towards the workout, closer to the workouts, especially your carbs around the workouts, is probably a good overall idea. However, if you're gaining a pound a week, you might want to eat a little bit more than maintenance on your rest days, just because it'll be easier to fit in the calories. All right, next question. Do you think that training 6 days per week is too much for most people to recover from? I was always a believer of 4 days being the sweet spot. However, I am considering 6 days by just splitting my upper body day across 2 days. Yeah, like push-pull legs. That's what push-pull legs is. And it's kind of gotten a bad rap, and I don't think there's anything special about training 6 days per week. I think 4 days per week is enough for most people. But if you prefer to train 6 days a week, there's nothing wrong with that. People who are like, oh, it's going to impact my recovery. That's more about the overall volume of work that you're doing, as well as how hard each set is. So I train every day. I take probably 1 day off per month. Yes, per month. Not per week, per month. I take a day off when I want to take a day off. Like I went to Hong Kong the other day, I took a day off. I enjoy training. I enjoy going to the gym. It gets me out of the house. I work from home. That is a big part of my day, and so I like training every day. But not every day is equally as stressful, right? So, my book goes into this in full detail. Day 1 is legs. Day 2 is chest and back. And then day 3 is arms and shoulders and cardio. So it's not as stressful of a day. My bro day is a lot more relaxed. It probably doesn't look relaxed when you see me doing it, but it's not nearly as stressful. There's very little systemic fatigue. It's pretty easy on the joints. You know, some people think that, oh, upper lower is not as stressful. Well, I'm just doing an upper lower, but I'm shifting the direct arm work and the shoulder work from the upper to another day. Is that more stressful? You could argue it's less stressful because splitting up that work makes it easier to recover from. So I would say the stress is less about how many days per week and more about how much you are doing. If you work out twice a day, that's not necessarily more stressful. If you take the same volume and you do it more frequently, generally it's easier to recover from, unless you use that increased frequency to do more or to train harder. All right, next question. I really like this one. What is the craziest beyond failure techniques that you've tried in the past? Did some of them end up working really well? What about those that didn't? Would be curious to see all the crazy things you've tried and how you've adapted from your training history. I've done some really messed up stuff before. I've done like drop sets on Romanian deadlifts, triple drop sets, quadruple drop sets. You know, where I'm doing 3 plates, 2.5 plates, 2 plates, plate and a half, plate, just each set all the way to failure. Beyond failure, where my form is breaking down and I'm like hitching the weight to get it up, then I'm, you know, putting it down and then stripping the plates off, stuff like that. And it worked. I progressed really well, but I also think as you get stronger, you have to be a little bit more careful with those kind of things, and you have to use the right tool for the job. So doing stuff like drop sets on squats, you don't see that very often because it doesn't actually make a lot of sense. I've done it, but in hindsight, why, right? So I've done a lot of dumb stuff in the past, and you know, now I tend to keep that type of high intensity training, which my first book goes into, you know, sweat, special workouts, exercises, and advanced techniques. I keep those more to isolations and to stuff where it actually makes sense. Whereas a lot of compounds, especially lower body, especially the spinal loading, the axially loading ones, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. I've done rest pause sets of 40 on deadlifts where it's like a 15 rep max, and the set takes 5 minutes, and it's, me just pulling the weight for singles when I'm just completely destroyed. I've done German volume training on deadlifts with like 70 to 75% of my 1 rep max. I remember where I failed 190 kilos, and then I backed down and did German volume training with 150 kilos, 330 pounds, which, that's not an amazing performance, but it is quite stressful as it is a pretty high percentage of 1 rep max. I wouldn't really recommend that. Like, it doesn't actually make a lot of sense. And at that point, you're kind of just surviving. The goal of training is not to survive. The goal of training is to thrive. And, when people see my training now, they think it's super hardcore, or you train really hard. I used to train harder. And it was actually excessive. And part of the reason why I don't think my current training is crazy is because I used to do some really mess up stuff in the past. I don't like to use the term wear and tear because the body is not a car. It's not like it's just constantly breaking down. No, you can heal, you can adapt, you can get better. But at the same time, I do think that the longer your training career goes and the stronger you get, the more sensible you need to be. And a lot of stuff, it didn't necessarily cause damage that I can feel now, but I do know based on observing other lifters, you got to be smart. You got to be smart. I'm a lot more smart, a lot smarter, wiser than I used to be, and hopefully all of y'all can learn from my mistakes. Next question, what are your thoughts on rest pause training, and can you do more than one rest pause set on the working muscle group in a session? One total set equals initial set plus 4 to 5 mini sets. I actually think that doing myo reps is more stressful than one set. And this might seem kind of obvious, right? Like you do one set near failure and then you rest and you're staying near failure. That is inherently more stressful than just a normal set. I think in my first book I counted this as one set for the initial set, and then you count the mini sets as half a set each. So if you do 4 mini sets, it would be 3 total sets. So initial set, four mini sets would be a total of 3 sets. Keep in mind when you're talking about sets, you're really just trying to measure stress, right? And so I think this is a pretty good approximation, because even if you count it with the effective reps model, like each mini set is worth a set, I don't think it actually does. I think it's a little bit less than a full set, but it's more than 0 for sure. So I think you can do more than one rest pause set, but for most people, 1 is probably enough. And if it's not enough, it's either a sign that it wasn't that hard, or you have very, very high work capacity. And on something like rear delts, yeah, it might be worth doing a second rest pause set. But on something like squats or something like a bench press or something like that, I would say 1 is certainly enough. And in fact, you might not even want to use rest pause. What do you think of elite/advanced athletes who have switched to a low/lower volume approach compared to what they previously did, saying I didn't need to do that much volume to grow? For example, Alberto Nunez's volume now versus before. Do you think they really could have gotten to where they are now without being slightly crazy and doing an insane amount of volume? And do you think you will ever decrease volume and still make gains? So I think it's worth noting that as you get stronger, your volume will probably have to decrease. And so I used to think there would just be this linear increase over time. So beginners, and then intermediates, and then advanced, and then elites, like your volume is just always going up. But I think that actually it's probably more like a U shape. So intermediates need more than beginners, but advanced might not need as much as intermediates. Partly because they're stronger, typically, almost always, and that means that every set is more stressful. So if I do a set compared to, John Hack doing a set, who's literally twice as strong as me, his set is more stressful than mine. And it's also more stimulatory than mine. So he's getting more out of each set. And it's probably not even linear. It's not like him bench pressing 600 pounds is twice as stressful as my max. I can't even bench 300, so it's more than twice as much. He's a freak. I think it actually goes up more exponentially, right? And so I think, yeah, your volume might actually decrease when you are very, very elite. Now, does this mean that he didn't need to do that much volume to grow? Well, he knows himself very well, so if he says that, I believe it. Is that true in every single case? Maybe, I'm not sure. I do know that volume is quite important, but some people do overdo it. I'm actually always looking to reduce my volume. So I'm not trying to increase my volume. Right now, I'm currently trying to get more out of every single set. That's another thing. When your technique gets very, very good, you're actually getting more out of every single set. So this is something that as an intermediate, you might see an advanced lifter do lower volume, but their sets are more stressful in terms of the fatigue and also the stimulus. So an advanced lifter might actually be getting more out of less. And so knowing what they know now, yeah, they might have a time machine and be able to get more out of less if they could put their brain in their old body. I think it's important to note that you don't have to be married to any particular training volume or training system as a whole. And the 3DMJ guys are great for this. They're great at updating their opinion and, still learning. And you look at someone like Geoff Alberts, he was on the lower volume side and he actually increased his volume. And then you have Nunez, who actually decreased his volume. So they are adapting their training over time, which I think that is the key. And you don't want to be that guy. Like, I don't want to be the volume guy. I don't want to be the training to failure guy, because when you pigeonhole yourself into that role or that idea, it can actually be very, very self-limiting. So I think you have to be very, very observant, and you have to be willing to change over time. The next question, how do you get those juicy triceps without hurting your elbows? I guess we all want to know the strategy to get arms built like legs as you have. Great progress, by the way. Well, I can't even do a handstand, so, they're clearly not particularly functional. Let's see. For elbow health, I will occasionally get achy elbows if I overdo things. I find that controlling the eccentric is the most important thing. So if I'm doing overhead extensions, I can cheat, but I really make sure to control that eccentric. For pushdowns, again, I can cheat, but I really make sure to, take 3 or 4 seconds on the way up. Because what seems to bother elbows the most is like slamming into that stretch position. So I really try to control it. Sometimes it might not look like I'm controlling it, but I can feel it, right? And it's almost like I'm flexing my biceps at the same time. So I'm not just like, flailing around. I'm actually keeping a lot of tension. Another thing is, and I've been told this is wrong, which I find to be humorous, I actually don't tuck my elbows. So I'm doing extensions, I just let my elbows and my wrists and my shoulders move where they want to move. And I think some people, they try to be too constricted, and it actually gives them elbow issues, because now they have to force themselves to get in this position that they don't actually feel comfortable in, but they heard this rule that, you gotta tuck your elbows, you gotta tuck.
Tuck that. Yeah, I'm in there, dog. I'm in there, dog. I'm in there, dog. You tucking it in there? But you tuck, dog. But you tuck, though.
You don't need to tuck. You can tuck if it feels better, but if it doesn't feel better, don't do it. I don't think it's genetic. I have the elbow gene, right? I can get a 23andMe test or whatever, and they're like, yep, you got the durable elbow gene. No, I think it's just progressing reasonably over time, over many years, and not trying to bite off more than I can chew. For example, if I'm doing skull crushers, that's where I'll be very careful on the eccentric. I'll stick to more moderate reps, and cable work is pretty elbow friendly. But if I'm doing skull crushers, I know that I have to be more careful, and so that's what I do. All right, next question from Bald Omni-Man. What's up, dude? Everyone should definitely go subscribe to his channel if you were not already for some very strange reason. What are your thoughts on dieting down to sub 10% body fat now that you've done it a few times now? Also, is it something that you see yourself doing every time you enter a fat loss phase, as opposed to cutting down to 12 to 15% and then bulking again? So this is a unique cut for me. My plans for this cut were to get shredded, right? And I can go from 20% to 12% in a couple months. No problem. It's a pretty aggressive fat loss phase, but for me getting to 12%, not that big a deal. It's where you get to 11, and then 10, and then 9, and then 8. That's where it is a huge pain in the ass, and that's where you have to go more slowly. That's where you get negative signs of dieting, etc. And so, no, this won't be a yearly thing. I won't be this lean again, probably for another 4 or 5 years. And that's the reality as a natural, right? Most people cannot stay that lean and make any kind of noticeable progress. I mean, you see the true naturals who stay that lean, they look the same year after year after year. And I don't want to have that fade, and so I won't try to get this lean. I'm not naturally lean. I have a big appetite. I don't have a particularly fast metabolism. This whole diet has been 15,000 steps a day, daily training, an hour and a half or so to 2 hours in the gym. And so, yeah, this will not be a yearly thing. I mean, it's been almost 6 months. It's been 5 or 6 months. So I wouldn't say it's a waste of time because I'm getting to my initial goal, which is the whole point. You set a goal and you stick to it, but this won't be a yearly thing for sure. All right, question number 1. How important is sleep really when it comes to muscle growth? Like, could it really be the difference between gaining 5 or 10 pounds of muscle in a year? Would really like to hear your thoughts. Also really appreciate your content and hope your growth never stops, including in the gym. LOL. Well, thank you. Depending on how bad it is, it could be. I mean, if you are getting 3 or 4 hours of crappy sleep at night, yeah, that could be the difference between 0 pounds and 10 pounds. You know, that is how important it is. And it could be the rate limiting factor. Now, again, going back to that previous question, if you're getting 6 to 7 hours of decent sleep a night, you can probably still make progress with that. You don't need to live like a monk or like a professional athlete in order to make progress. I would say as long as you have your other ducks in a row, if that's a saying. I think that's a saying. As long as everything else is on point, then you should be fine. So, assuming your sleep is not absolutely terrible, it probably won't make that big of a difference. That being said, 10 pounds of muscle is a lot in a year. I might have gained like 5 to 6 pounds per year the last 2 years, I would say. So most people are not going to be gaining 10 pounds of muscle in a year past that very, very beginner phase. And so, for most people, 5 pounds a year past the newbie gains, that is very, very good going. So I would say for most people, 5 pounds is actually pretty good going. And I see people who gain 5 pounds of muscle in a year and they're somehow disappointed. That's pretty good, especially if you put years like that back to back to back. You will very, very quickly look much, much different. Finally, I just want to say that there are okay justifications for poor sleep and there are non-okay justifications. So if you have a newborn child, that's a pretty decent justification, I would say. And, if my wife and I had a kid, I would lower my expectations of muscle growth for that year. I think that is something very, very reasonable to do. However, if you claim to be all about training and you're going out and you're getting drunk and you're partying a lot, well, you're not actually all about training, right? It's just clearly not as important to you as other things. And that's fine if you're honest about it, but a lot of people are not. You're staying up all night gaming and you're like, man, I'm such a hardcore trainer, and then you're not actually making progress because you're going to bed at 4 a.m., that kind of thing. That's where I think you have to be honest, especially with yourself. And by yourself, I don't necessarily mean you, dear questioner. That's more of a general yourself. All right, that is all for this Q&A. If you like this and you want to hear more of my thoughts on training, you can check out my books. I will link them in a pinned comment down below. Also check out the sponsor of today's video, Boostcamp. I will link it in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.